Our reading for today is from the Gospel of Matthew, the 10th chapter, verses 40 through 42. Whoever welcomes you welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes the one who sent me. Whoever welcomes a prophet in the name of a prophet will receive a prophet's reward, and whoever welcomes a righteous person in the name of a righteous person will receive the reward of the righteous. And whoever gives even a cup of cold water to one of these little ones in the name of a disciple, truly I tell you, none of these will lose their reward. May our lives be transformed by the reading and the hearing of this good news. Amen. We have quite a short passage to look at today. It's a conclusion to the passages we've been looking at the past few Sundays. This middle section of the Gospel of Matthew is what's known as the missionary discourse. Jesus was preparing his disciples for their missionary travels, giving them advice, encouragement, and instruction. They were to go out into the world to share the good news of God's love. In doing so, they would need to depend on the hospitality and welcome of strangers in order to have a place to sleep at night, food to eat, and water to drink. This kind of hospitality of taking care of the stranger was very much a part of the culture in the ancient Middle East. It's a biblical value lifted up over and over in the scriptures. The hope was that there would be those folks who would live out the values of hospitality and welcome, and so would take care of Jesus' disciples. But Jesus knew that not all would be so welcoming. He had to get his disciples ready for the rejection and uncertainty they would face. In our passage today, Jesus lifts up this value of welcome as something deeply important to our faith. He mentions the word welcome 6 times in these 3 short verses. Here he reminds us that welcome is so important that those who practice welcome will receive a great reward. From welcoming his disciples to welcoming the prophets, the ones who so often bring a hard and challenging word that people don't want to hear, to welcoming even the smallest child with a cold cup of water, all who extend this kind of welcome will receive a reward in heaven. Welcome is essential. I've always tried to be a welcoming person, though I know, of course, I could do better. I saw my parents practice welcome so often in their ministry when I was growing up. I knew from our family stories the way that welcome had shaped us as a family. I've heard the story often of how my parents became such good friends with my late godmother, Cindy, and her late husband, Jack. It was the 70s. My parents had just moved to Evansville, serving their first churches as pastors in the United Church of Christ after graduating from Chicago Theological Seminary. They were in their mid-20s then, and were trying to figure out getting settled in. They had met Jack, who was also a UCC pastor serving in Evansville, at a clergy gathering, and Jack and Cindy welcomed them, saying, "If you ever need anything, just give us a call." Well, one night, that first winter in Evansville, there was a terrible ice storm that knocked the power out at the parsonage where my parents lived. The temperature was dropping quickly, and Jack and Cindy's welcoming offer came to mind. They decided to give them a call. Jack and Cindy welcomed my parents with open arms, bringing this young clergy couple in out of the cold. That welcome was the beginning of a lifelong friendship. Again and again, Jack and Cindy would throw open their doors and hearts and welcome us in, even if our knock came at midnight on our drive home from a Florida vacation when Jack and Cindy lived in Louisville. The beds were always ready. The fridge was stocked. "Oh, that must be the Frishimoris," is how I recall Cindy answering our calls from the road. For my wedding, Cindy gave me a welcome sign, a very fitting gift. It was from the famous Louisville Hadley pottery. It's a simple sign, but it reminds me of the welcome she showed my family again and again. I put that sign right at eye level, so it's one of the first things you see when you step through our front door. A while back, one of my new nephews was over visiting, and out of the blue, he said, "I like your welcome sign." I don't think anyone else has ever commented on that sign, to be honest, and so it struck me that this little one noticed. I hope so much that I can pass on that spirit of welcome to the next generation, because that welcoming spirit Jack and Cindy showed us changed our family for the better. Welcome and hospitality in Jesus' day were important. Life was not easy back then. Resources were limited, many were poor. For a traveler out on the road, hospitality could literally mean life or death. So the value was to err on the side of welcome. In Hebrews, we're reminded that in welcoming a stranger, we might actually be entertaining angels. So we better be extending that Christian welcome to all. Jesus modeled for his disciples this great spirit of welcome. He surrounded himself with sinners and tax collectors, the poor and downtrodden, with those who were sick and despised. He came to serve those who for so much of their lives knew not welcome but rejection. This extravagant welcome Jesus showed got him in trouble, but he kept at it. He kept at it, and he invited his followers to keep the welcome going. I came across a reflection on this passage that I thought summarized these verses well. Dr. Emily Towns, a dean at Vanderbilt Divinity School, wrote, "In just a few short sentences of power and compassion, we are challenged to think more deeply about what is meant by welcoming one another. It is only after doing so that we discover the reward that comes from the deep hospitality found in God's welcome of us." I love that. Jesus modeled a spirit of welcome. He taught his disciples to do the same, and he promised that those who welcomed would receive a reward that comes from God's own welcome of us. The truth is, we are not always so welcoming. In the deep divisions that exist in our society today, I think we don't put into practice this biblical value as often as we should. Welcome is not easy. It involves vulnerability, opening yourself to another, inviting them into your life. Extending welcome invites the possibility for lives to be changed and transformed, and we're not always ready for that. Jesus knew that his disciples would not always be met with welcome. It would be the opposite for many, because Jesus' disciples had been sent out to bring a hard and challenging word to the world. I think Jesus offers these words to his disciples as he sends them out because he didn't want them to lose sight of their own welcoming spirits as they met rejection face to face. Remember, he tells them, welcome comes with reward. Dr. Towns captures it so well again when she reflects on what the disciples were up against. She writes, "Love is not always met with love. Jesus is clear with his disciples that being his followers will be difficult at times and that they will suffer persecution. Sometimes love," she says, "is met with crucifixion. Yet we are called to love in the midst of hate, even in those times where it appears that hatred has won." Reading that from Dr. Towns got me thinking about another story of welcome from my family history. For those of you from Zion who are reading this message or watching this reflection on YouTube or Facebook, you know the history of my dad's family. But for those who are new, I'd like to share it with you too. In the early 1900s, my great-grandparents immigrated to the United States from Japan, and they sought to carve out a better life for their children. They wanted to make the American dream their reality. Living in California, though, after Pearl Harbor, my great-grandparents, my grandparents, their siblings' small children were all rounded up and sent to internment camps. With the signing of Executive Order 9066, my family officially became the enemy. It didn't matter that my grandparents were born here, were citizens of the United States, and that this was the only country they had known, their home, the land they loved. Their association with Japan, their race, made them the enemy too. It was a trying and traumatic experience for them. They lived in dirty horse stables at the Santa Anita racetrack, and then they were shipped off to the high desert of Cody, Wyoming, to the Heart Mountain Relocation Center. They had been completely rejected by their country, their neighbors, their schools, their communities. The welcome that was promised to them was rescinded. They made do in the internment camps. They found low-wage jobs in the mess hall or making camouflage nets for the military. My grandpa, who himself was an Eagle Scout, helped lead the Boy Scout troop that the internees had organized, so some of the young children had something to keep them occupied. They had lost absolutely everything, but they knew, shikata ga nai, it cannot be helped, so they carried on. Eventually, a bright ray of hope shone into my grandpa's life. Quaker communities across the country decided to put their Christian hospitality and welcome into practice in some bold ways, as did other Christian communities. The Quakers especially began sponsoring college students out of the internment camps whose educations were disrupted by their forced removal. One of those students was my grandfather. Through the love and welcome of a Quaker community in Kansas City, Missouri, my grandpa was able to finish his education at the University of Kansas City. He got to continue pursuing his American dream because those Quaker communities chose the way of welcome and hospitality. They chose the way of Jesus. That welcome changed the fate of my family. After graduating, my grandfather went on to serve in the Army. He proudly fought for the United States in the Philippines and in Japan. By the time he finished his service, the internment camps were mostly closed. Rather than moving back to California, where he had experienced so much hatred and rejection, he moved to Chicago, hoping to get back to something of a normal life. He got married to my grandma. He tried again and again to find a job, but no one would hire him because they still saw him as the enemy. My grandfather had made such an impression, though, at the University of Kansas City that they told him at his graduation that if he ever needed a job, they would have one for him. He remembered that promise. And so that first job at the University of Kansas City set him on a successful career in higher education business management. The Quakers took a great risk in committing themselves to welcoming like Jesus welcomed. They extended their love and their care even to those who had been declared the enemy. Without that welcome, my family's story would have been so different. I probably wouldn't even be here today. The stories of my family's history, the teachings of Jesus, the welcome he showed, it all reminds me so much that an act of welcome can truly change someone's life. Even the act of simply offering a cup of cold water to a little child, Jesus reminds us, can make all the difference. Unfortunately, There are too many people who have faced the pain of rejection and condemnation instead of welcome and hospitality, and it has left for them a deep, lasting mark. A simple act of welcome can change someone's life. It can reveal to them the welcoming love of Christ. I've seen it not just in my own family history, but in the lives of so many. May we welcome as Christ welcomed, because it just might change someone's life for the better. Amen.